today we'll be covering vulnerability assessment reporting and penetration testing reporting. So I'll be outlining it based on content that I've previously put out, very recently put out, and we can go from there. So this article here can be found in Medium. I posted the link for everyone to see. All right. So in a nutshell, going over, a vulnerability assessment report is a documented form of assessment findings. So the whole intent of the vulnerability assessment report is so that you can show internal leadership in most cases what is going on. So the main thing here is that we want to prevent fear, uncertainty, and doubt. FUD happens a lot. We want to be able to present these findings, whether they're critical, low, high. You want to present these without bringing on too much FUD. Preventing that FUD is one of the main things you want to do, especially when presenting internally. So the purpose of vulnerability reports in reality is to direct you towards tackling the most critical security concerns first. So when you're presenting these vulnerability reports, they're usually for vulnerability management. So you have to prioritize what you're going to fix based on those findings. All right. So we're going to address how to actually get that report built out from beginning to end. All right. So I've already addressed the target audience, but keep in mind that most of these are internal and the end result is for managing assets internally. So let's just go over the report real quick. The executive summary, as you can see here, feel free to follow along. It's just a broad overview of the scans results. This is where the executive summary section is where you would include the date and range of the assessment, or a general status of the assessment and summary of your findings regarding risk to the client or the leadership in this case. All right, this is where you would also put your disclaimer, let them know, hey, this is what happened during the assessment. Overall, these are the key findings. In general, keep it vague, no metrics. All right, you just want to keep it general. Hey, overall your application is at a low or medium level of exposure. This is where you address that right up front where there are no technical details. This is more than likely what the CISO is going to look at if presenting internally. All right. So the methodology, there are various methodologies that you can address during the vulnerability assessment report. Network based, you can go off of a network vulnerability assessment. Application based, application vulnerability assessment, API. With these various test methodologies, you can test various technologies that are in the network, and usually this is done internally. All right. This can be done internally with just basic scanners such as Nessus. If you're open source and you want to test this out on your home network, you can use Greenbone Vulnerability Manager or the Nessus free version. There are multiple ways to assess the security posture with vulnerability assessments here. This right here, section 3, these numbers here represent the sections that are in your report. So just to get some context behind that, these are mapped out for what should be in your report in order. All right, your scope and coverage, you want to cover your scope. You want to make sure that what you tested was also in line with what was supposed to be tested. You don't want to scope creep on scanning some stuff that's not supposed to be scanned. Okay, in most cases scanning is how we get this done. In other cases it is penetration testing, in which I will cover that report as well. Your findings, all right, your findings, this is where you address in most cases your scan results. You want to go ahead and map that out by CVE or criticality. If you know some internal stuff that's going on, then you would of course reshape that and make it more subjective. all right, more subjective to what you know is going on. So if you got a high severity on a network that you know is not internally connected or something like that, some along those lines, if you personally subjectively know that the severity and priority is not going to fly with the CISO or other leadership, then make sure you put that in the right section of your findings. All right. Usually the vulnerability assessment includes a risk assessment. An accurate assessment of the vulnerability severity should be included in a strong vulnerability assessment report. So from here, the risk assessment, basically you want to include an index of all vulnerabilities identified. Those categorized as critical, high, medium, or low severity. Give a brief explanation of the risk categories that you've listed out. Along with that risk assessment, you want to list all the vulnerabilities with details of if you're using a scanner like Tenable, you want to give details of the plugin name, the description, the solution, and how many instances that has happened. So on multiple occasions, you can have one app with multiple CVEs on it. You want to, per instance, you want to write that out. So your recommendations, you basically want to cover the actions that the client should take. All right, you don't want to avoid you don't want to do this assessment without including remediation or recommendations. All right, we don't present the problem without an idea of the solution. All right, when we're doing these appendices, these usually include additional stuff that wasn't in the above report, or stuff that they have told you to put to the side. All right, usually they're going to be visual aids. So if you went and confirmed a vulnerability and want to provide screenshots, you want to put that in the appendix section of your report. All right. So the best practices: clarity and conciseness. You want to make sure that your assessment report is clear and concise. Make sure this is where you want to prevent that fear, uncertainty, and doubt amongst the team. How you present this is the key piece here of when you publicly presenting this to whoever is present. All right. Your visual representation would usually be something like the picture I have here on the article. All right. So this is where you can screenshot that and throw it in the back in the appendix section. Okay. You can either do a snapshot in the executive summary, or you can put this in the appendix section. I'd prefer the appendix section and let them know within the executive summary. Okay. Provide relevant contextual information about the systems assessed, including their criticality and sensitivity. All right. So you want to have the proper context. Okay. So the main thing is sticking with what is relevant here. All right. This one is kind of self-explanatory, but I want to cover it briefly. Feel free to go back and read the article here. Actionable recommendations. I already addressed this above, but this is more so that you want to make sure that this is covered as a best practice. All right. It's all about how you provide those recommendations. You want to make sure they're factual. You want to make sure they're feasible and tailored to the organization. You don't want to tell somebody to remediate this a certain way when they don't have the certain technologies present or the solution. Everybody's security posture is different. Timeliness, that is very important. All right, so when you have these reports, getting it there on time and when you present is very important. All right, keeping it short and sweet during the presentation is also important. So you don't want to be that guy presenting your vulnerability assessment report on a Friday. That's because that's the day you chose to present it. You don't want to spend your Friday going back and forth on an unclear report, or in some cases presenting this report period on a Friday. Clear communication. You'd have people that would want to fight findings on the negative side of things, and when it comes to clear communication on the positive side of things, you'd have to be prepared for those general questions. Executive leadership are not technical. All right, they're not expected to be technical, at least. So be prepared for that immediate feedback. All right. That's the gist of the vulnerability assessment reporting piece. All of the above can spin or fly anyway, as I've addressed in the final thoughts here. Anything can happen with this report while you're presenting it. The CISO might jump in and say, "What is that?" Just be prepared that you know what's going on when you're presenting this, because there will be a lot of feedback on the positive side and a lot of pushback on the negative side. All right. So that's the short and sweet of vulnerability assessment reporting. It's not as comprehensive as pen test reporting, because we all know that pen test reporting is a bit more technical. So let's drop that one and go over the pen test report. So we have a penetration test report here. All right, a penetration test report is an in-depth description of the vulnerabilities, faults, and flaws found during the security assessment. So these are in-depth. All right, keyword in-depth. Okay, so we didn't just use a scanner and post screenshots and graphs. That is not what we did during this. We did a penetration test. So this report is a bit more technical, and you have to make sure that you're clear and concise in your executive summary, basically. The pen test procedure goes beyond just running different test scenarios to find security flaws. That is the gist of it. We want to go do a deeper dive into penetration testing, your findings, and the remediation. All right, we need to give clear remediation steps for the pen test report, because these affect direct technologies. Okay. So the purpose, all right, make sure you specify your purpose in there. That is going to be addressed firsthand. Make sure you keep in mind the target audience. Okay. So you're going to have technical and non-technical stakeholders looking at this report. In most cases, this report is going to affect the entire infrastructure. Whether it be network, application, API, it doesn't matter. It's going to affect the organization as a whole. In most cases, when they're ordering these penetration test reports or penetration test assessments, they want to know how directly does these findings impact the business as a whole. Okay, so let's get into crafting the report. All right, so the executive summary. So I addressed the executive summary, sort of how it goes in the vulnerability assessment category, but as you can see here, this report will give management a broad overview of the test to aid in their decision making on whether or not to take further action. Keyword is or not. So in some cases, penetration test reports are thorough. You can run into a gang of low severity findings and find nothing medium, high, or critical. So the key word is to keep in mind that or not. Okay, so your report may not be actionable. It may not be anything. It may be something that the organization was already fully aware of, and you will keep finding on the next penetration test for the same client. They just refuse to fix it because it's not a priority. This happens a lot. Let's see. A wonderful way to complete this executive summary is to offer practical suggestions. Okay, so be prepared to present the exact code fix to that dev for the app test, or that network security engineer for the network test. Okay, so just be prepared for that. All right, so the methodology. An organization's technological security threats are thoroughly analyzed in a penetration testing report. Okay, so this in general, this means that they are thoroughly analyzed by you and the team that you're presenting to. So what we don't do is present false positives. All right, this happens a lot. This happens during the vulnerability assessments as well, because we are using scanners for those. So you may run across false positives that end up in a vulnerability assessment report, which on the vulnerability assessment piece, you would have to go and verify that plugin is functional for the scan. So black box. You have black box testing reports. That in general is you having no information. All right, penetration testers will basically be blind. They wouldn't know what is going on with the target in question. All right. So your white box, they'll give you as much information as they can, especially if they built the application that for applications they would make sure they would give you the source code for the software. In network in the network perspective, they would make sure they give you the entire infrastructure, whether it be a bloodhound report or something along those lines. All right. So your gray box reports are pretty much a step up for the black box testing reports. Okay, so they give you what they want to give you here, basically. So as I address the web app reports, the hardware testing reports, they all vary. All right, they have different reporting criteria, different audiences, and different technical details. Okay, so the note taking process when it comes to making sure your report is efficient. All right, so you have to have a solid note taking process. All right, having a good repeatable note taking process will provide just overall good benefits for the team. Okay, overall it saves everybody time if you can make it more comprehensive. In some cases, I use my note taking as a draft of a report. I'm able to take my notes and copy and paste them into the report and simply tailor them into a report like fashion. The important elements would be to cover the admin info. You need to cover the admin info, the credentials found, the scope, all of the findings. Just quickly jot that down for yourself and make sure it's clean enough and presentable for actually presenting that to the client within the final report. Right. Scope and limitations. All right, that would be section 3. All right, every report is different, but for this training piece, that is going to be section 3. Okay, you want to address the scope. Make sure that to them and vice versa that you understand the scope and the limitations of the test. All right, this is the beginning of the report where everyone would see that you understand the assigned scope and the assigned limitations. All right, the exclusions for testing, all of that, you would just reiterate that before starting the report. So this is where you would address your findings, your technical findings. All right, so the end goal is to just deliver those technical details of what happened, and not only what happened, but right in your findings area, you want to make sure that you can address a small snapshot of the remediation steps. The POCs are the main piece here. So if you don't have a proof of concept with additional steps for people to take to replicate your finding, then you have not checked this block effectively. A POC is very much important, along with the steps taken, the steps you perform in order to exploit a certain vector. All right, so a small risk assessment, you want to have that. Not every pen test report is going to have that risk assessment, but you are going to have that documentation of the impact on your finding. That is going to be mandatory in your report. You're going to have that documented to where you show, hey, this affects the business by this, or this finding affects the entire organization as a whole, or this finding only affects your users. Some along those lines. Okay, so your recommendations and remediations, you want to make sure you have those basically mapped out. Okay, so be clear in the recommendation. You cannot provide a problem or present a problem without a solution. That is a big no-no. You're supposed to be the technical contact, and your findings are not the only problem here. You have to provide the client with a way forward. You have to give them a way to fix what you found. Okay, or at least an idea. Not everything is immediately able to be remediated, but you have to give an idea. Okay. The appendix area, this is definitely where you want to put your code. Example, it would be your code used. That is too long to put in your findings area. Um, let's take burp click bandit for example. That is too long to put in the findings area if you want to use that in your POC or um, step-by-step guide on how to re-exploit your finding. You want to make sure that that stuff is in the appendix area, and in your findings area you want to reference what appendix in each step that you placed the actual POC code or the testing code if it is too long. In some cases your findings are able to house some of the small replication steps such as curl commands. Hey, paste this curl command in bash terminal to replicate this finding. That in the findings area is just fine. But when we go stepping into long POC code such as click bandit or anything else, you want to put that in an appendix separate and annotate that the POC code is in that appendix. All right. Some of the best practices would be to make sure, same thing along the lines as the vulnerability assessment report that I put on the other article. Penetration testers, all right, may be quite difficult and technical. So what you want to do is make sure you're not being too technical for your audience. All right. So you as the attacker does not have the full scope of the dev side of things or the dev mindset. Okay. So once you get to talking about this code, even though the devs built this code, they might not understand what you found or broken functions, or you may run into a network security engineer that may not fully understand what you mean or your finding in general. Okay, so just make sure you keep it clear and concise for this pen test report, because we tend to get overly technical in this particular report. Happens all the time. And you will find yourself in a findings review meeting over explaining stuff just because you didn't properly explain it in the written report. Okay. The visual aids, that is something that you definitely want to put in the appendix area. It doesn't happen often with the visual aids outside of screenshots. Screenshots usually go in the findings area, but if you have additional visual aids for your findings, then go ahead and put those in the appendix area. All right. So make sure your finding align with proper context on the pen test report as well. That is another big thing. So make sure it's relevant to the organization and relevant to the target being tested. Timeliness. So the reports, usually sending these reports out, they're sent out and everything usually stays text based. Okay, so you might get a call back for a findings review to elaborate on this. No response is a good response. Usually that means that they accepted the report as is, and from there it'll be back and forth as far as getting questions about the report itself, or further questions on remediation implementation. All right, these usually are pretty straightforward once you get them sent out. All right, ongoing support, that's kind of what I was addressing just now. The ongoing support, that back and forth after the pen test is completed, be prepared for that. All right, always expect that. If you're not going to fully document the full details of how to move forward in the pen test report, make sure you're just readily available for the client to provide that ongoing support, because you as a pen tester should also be able to act as a consultant on moving past just the pen test. Okay, that should be that's the gist of it. All right, feel free to go out and review these articles and let me know if you have any questions on them on the Discord side of things.